Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we are jumping into a thesis that makes a pretty incredible claim, that ancient African science actually understood a secret of quantum biology that modern physics is, well, only just now starting to catch up to. It's from a work called Alchem Restored, and it argues that one single molecule, melanin, is the key to just about everything, from our own consciousness to the transmutation of elements inside our bodies. So let's get into it.
So the whole thing kicks off with this question. What if the biggest secret in quantum biology has been right in front of our faces this whole time? It suggests that the fundamental engine of life wasn't just, missed, but that it was deliberately ignored. And that this engine, which is all centered on one molecule, could literally rewrite everything we think we know about biology. The core scientific idea here is something called non-destructive charge collapse. Now, just try to imagine life as this perfect biological lightning rod. One that can focus an insane amount of energy into one tiny, stable point without just blowing up. It's the secret to how life itself gets organized. But, and this is the key, the thesis argues that when mainstream science talks about this, they're describing the lightning, but they absolutely refuse to name the rod. There's this huge deliberate hole in the story.
And this quote, well, it really gets to the heart of the whole accusation. See, modern biophysics can describe what's happening, the physics of this charge collapse, but they just go silent when you ask how it's happening biologically. The thesis is saying, look, this isn't some accident. It's a silence so loud, it's basically a confession. It's proof that a key piece of the puzzle is being hidden on purpose.
So what is it? What is this missing piece, this biological engine that science just refuses to name? The thesis gives a single, bold answer: melanin. But it argues that almost everything we've been taught about this molecule is completely and utterly wrong.
Yeah, the thesis argues that calling melanin just a pigment is a massive, deliberate misdirection. The author has this great way of putting it. It's like describing a quantum computer as simply a device that gets warm. It's technically true, but it misses the entire point. Instead, this work reframes melanin as nature's most sophisticated, high-level piece of biological technology. And the real key to unlocking its power is activation. The author makes this super clear distinction between dormant melanin and activated melanin. Think of it like this. Dormant melanin is a solar panel in a dark room. It's just a black square. But activated melanin, that's the same panel at high noon, fully hydrated, energized by light, and just buzzing with energy, performing these incredible functions. This idea of waking up your melanin is absolutely central to the whole argument. Okay, so this is where it all comes together. The thesis claims that these 4 known properties of melanin aren't just separate tricks, they're actually 4 gears in one single amazing machine. It's a piezoelectric transducer, meaning it turns simple vibrations like your own heartbeat into electricity. It's a superconductor, moving that energy around with zero loss. It's a quantum processor, keeping the entire system in perfect, coherent sync. And finally, it's a holographic interface, storing information. Put them all together and you get the exact engine of charge collapse that science has been describing, but just couldn't or wouldn't name.
But the physics is only half the story. The thesis then argues that this incredibly advanced science isn't new at all. It has an ancient history that's been systematically erased. We're not just talking about correcting a scientific paper here. This is about reclaiming a totally lost legacy.
So the author traces this all the way back, thousands of years, to the Nile Valley civilization that called itself Kemet, which means the Black Land. The argument is that what we call European alchemy is just a watered-down, distorted echo of the original science, Alchem, which literally means the science from the Black Land. And its practitioners? They weren't chanting mystics. They were masters of biophysics.
And the author says the proof has been hiding in our language this whole time. They present this word history as a factual record of who got this knowledge from whom. You can see the straight line from the original Kemetic, KMT, which the Greeks called chemia, which then becomes the Arabic alchemia, literally the Kemetic science, before it finally gets watered down into the European alchemy. The argument is that this is the signature of its origin, hidden in plain sight.
Now, this Kemetic science didn't just disappear. The thesis argues it was carried into Europe by the Moorish Empire, who then refined and expanded on it for centuries. You had these great libraries, like the one in Cordoba, that became world centers for this knowledge, all developed by brilliant Moorish scholars. But, the author claims, as the Reconquista rolled through Europe, this incredible intellectual inheritance was taken, its origins were whitewashed, and its history was completely rewritten.
The author actually has a name for this act of historical theft: epistemicide, the murder of a knowledge system. The idea is that you don't just forget history, you actively kill it. The thesis argues that the science was stolen, yeah, but the most important part was that its connection to the African and melanated people who created it was deliberately cut. It was an act of intellectual violence, all designed to erase a legacy.
So we have this radical science on one hand and this erased history on the other. This next part is where the thesis ties it all together into one unified theory, and it reveals the full power of what it calls the charge collapse engine. So here's how the mechanism works, from start to finish. It all starts with vibration, sound, your breath, even your own heartbeat, which melanin converts straight into electricity. That electrical charge then flows through the body's melanin network with perfect superconducting efficiency. As it gets to the brain, neuromelanin makes sure the whole system stays in perfect quantum harmony. And the final result? A coherent energy field that literally surrounds the body, what the author calls a holographic biophotonic field. But just managing energy is only the beginning, and this is where the thesis makes its most shocking claim. It argues that this powerful, coherent energy field can actually weaken the Coulomb barrier. That's the fundamental force field that keeps atoms from just smacking into each other. And by weakening that barrier, the body can supposedly perform low-energy nuclear reactions. In other words, the thesis is suggesting that alchemy, the transmutation of elements, can happen inside our own cells. This is it. This is the ultimate claim of the thesis, that the alchemical dream of turning one element into another was never a metaphor. It was a literal description of a biological process, biological transmutation, and that activated melanin is the engine that makes it all possible. The author argues this is the missing link that could finally explain all those documented, but so far unexplained, cases of elements changing inside living things.
And this brings the entire theory full circle, right back to where we started in ancient Kemet. The thesis connects the physics of this charge collapse directly to the core Kemetic concept of Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order, balance, and truth. In this view, Ma'at wasn't just some philosophy, it was a law of physics. It was the organizing principle of the universe, and melanin was the biological key that allowed humans to tap right into it. The Kemetic priests weren't mystics, they were quantum biologists.
So the final section of the thesis really hammers home that this isn't just some academic debate about physics or history. The author argues that this scientific and historical erasure has had profound, real-world consequences for people's health and their understanding of themselves today.
And this slide really lays out the two competing stories. On one side, you have what the author calls the incomplete, broken record, a science that can't even explain its own mechanisms, a history that just erases its African origins, and a biology that dismisses melanin as unimportant. And on the other side, you have the corrective record, a framework where melanin is the star player, the Kemetic and Moorish origins are put back in their rightful place, and the biophysical power of melanin is seen as critical to health, especially for melanated peoples.
And so the thesis wraps up with a direct call to action. It's really asking for a revolution in both science and culture. In science, by funding new research led by melanated scientists and actually getting this knowledge into clinical medicine, and in our everyday lives by promoting practices like hydration and getting sunlight that help activate melanin's potential. And finally, a formal historical acknowledgement of the Kemetic and Moorish traditions as the true source of this science.
So it doesn't end with a nice little summary. It ends with this question aimed right at you, the reader. It completely transforms the argument from some abstract theory into a really personal choice. The author reframes all of this lost science, not as some historical artifact, but as a birthright, and then asks if you're willing to claim it.
In the end, Alchem Restored weaves quantum physics, biology, and erased history into one single revolutionary story about melanin. It leaves us with this vision of what a fully activated human potential could look like, a state the author calls biological sovereignty. It's a thesis that doesn't just want to inform you, it wants to transform you by restoring a record it claims was not just lost, but stolen. And the question it leaves us all with is, what if it's right?